The next question says, should I use active or instant yeast? This is always one of those $1,000,000 questions. If you were in Italy and you trained like I did, we always refer to dry yeast as lievito di birra or brewer's yeast, right? So yeast starts out as a compressed brick, right? And that compressed brick contains a lot of water inside of it. The problem with the compressed brick or cake yeast or baker's yeast, there's so many different names for that fresh compressed yeast. The problem is that it's highly volatile. Usually has a shelf life by the time you get it of about 7 to 10 days, because from the time that it's produced to the time that it's dead, there's a lot of time in between before you actually get it. So we like to use dry yeast or brewer's yeast or lievito di birra because it has a longer shelf life. Usually almost 2 years. 2 years is what we typically see on these. Now, what's the difference between instant and active yeast? It's the way that it performs. The instant yeast, you're going to see, we say like instant yeast works in an instant, where active dry yeast is what your grandmother used, or maybe your mother, whoever was using yeast in your family. You might have seen people take some yeast, put it in some warm water, add some sugar, stir it around, and then all of a sudden it starts to get really bubbly and foamy, and it's ready to use. In that same instance, active dry yeast performs a little bit differently. From the place that it's manufactured, it's coated with some what's called ascorbic acid. Ascorbic acid is vitamin C for all intents and purposes, and acts as a natural dough conditioner. So when you add active dry yeast to your doughs, we add it at a smaller percentage because the dough will create a looser type dough, just because naturally the way that yeast is working, and it's almost conditioning and will make a more extensible dough, if you will. What's the main difference? If you're going to the grocery store and you say, look, I can't find instant yeast, but I see quick rise yeast and there's other labels of how they sell it, most of the time quick rapid yeast is instant yeast. My preference is to use the products that come from our friends at Lesaf. Lesaf owns the Red Star Yeast Company, which is very historic around the United States, and Lesaf is very well known throughout the world. So if you go to the grocery store, if you're baking at home and you want to create a dough using instant yeast, look for instant yeast or quick rapid yeast, and that'll be the same thing. Active dry yeast, you'll never be able to mistake it because it's always labeled active dry yeast. The main difference, you're going to bloom one in water, warm water with some sugar on the active side. The instant yeast works in an instant, so you can add it right into your flour. For those of you professionals out there who are baking inside pizzerias or bakeries and all that, you'll also know that most of our doughs are very well hydrated. There's a lot of water in them. So if you were to take active dry yeast and put it into your flour just the same way as you would instant yeast, you can mix it without blooming it, meaning putting it in warm water with the sugar and all that, and it'll work just fine. I hope that answers your question.